All right. Whoa. Yes, let's drop the phone. Tomboy official, what's up? I was wanting to talk about. I don't know how much I want to go into talking about religion and sexual repression, but it is something that comes up, and I don't know. Okay, I don't have stats on this. I don't have any stats on this, but I'll just say I've listened to a lot of stories of people from really extreme kind of religion, like is extreme the right word? Really, what do they call it? High demand religions, like the Amish, Mennonites, Mormons. Some of them. There's some offshoots of different kind of Mormon type groups. I don't know if they're considered Mormons or some cult type thing, culty type of stuff. Like I've listened to a lot of podcasts where people talked about cults that they left and stuff. And so people being in cults, leaving the cults, um and talking about, their religions. A lot of those high demand religions I've noticed um do have like some kind of a sexual repression to them, even like in the Jewish ones. And I would say, from my understanding of mainstream Judaism, they're pretty sex positive, in my opinion. At least, like as far as like open mindedness about dating and like finding somebody. I've I I've always interpreted what I saw as like kind of more open minded compared to like some forms of like Christianity, Islam, some other forms of Judaism, and the super extreme type of Amish type of people. Um, and this isn't to really like crap on religions or anything. I love religions. I just see that there's also a dark side to them where I'm very careful with anyone who has influence and leadership. Those two combinations of leadership influencing groups of people who are going to later on raise other people and pass down ideas to them about how they should live their lives. Something as important as like religious teachings. I think like when it gets really really strict and people start getting taught to be very sexually repressive, things start going in a real weird direction from that point on. um there was something I watched, I think I've talked about this, but it was called The Devil's Playground. Not the Amish version. I watched the Amish documentary, but there's this movie from like the 30s or the 40s or something, or 50s. There's this old movie called The Devil's Playground that's about this. I don't know if they're Jesuits or Catholic, but it was like a seminary school for boys. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically one of them was kind of like a bedwetter, kind of. And I've known of maybe two people. I don't know. I've known of some people that were bedwetters later than childhood, and including childhood, but like later than like what would be like an average age. I've noticed sometimes it's connected to abuse, sometimes it's connected to sexuality, some form of like repressive type of thing. And I think that's what was going on in this movie. Was this young guy was like so sexually repressed in early phases of puberty, and no one to talk to about it, really, no one to really be open about it with. There was no authentic outlet to really learn. He was separated from his parents and siblings, living at this boarding school, and they would come visit. I think they could have like picnics outside and stuff, and like, you know, you'd like hang out with your family for like a Saturday or something. I don't know how many days, but like there would be days when family would come, but basically they lived on this dorm site, and on the property like there was like a forest and all these other things, like kind of in nature, and they didn't really get out much unless they were taken on like a trip in like a car that, they'd have like an old car that was like, I think part of the you know that school's, the school owned like a car or something, and they slept in like a big dorm, not even like dorm rooms, but like one of those big, you've seen those movies where they sleep in like a big, kind of like a barracks, like that, like it's kind of like a, like without the private rooms, they slept like in a barracks pretty much. And um you know uh there was a, I'm not going to ruin the whole movie, but there was a point towards the end, after something major happened, where one of the priests was like, it's not natural to have these kids like, so, you know, detached from like what's going on as far as like puberty, sexuality, things like that. He was like, it's kind of having the reverse effect, and it's making them so they're kind of like acting a little strange, and there's like stuff happening that probably wouldn't be happening. Um and they kind of mentioned something that I never really looked into, but they were saying that, there were some sadomasochistic practices, but those guys who were, they were kind of older guys, not older guys, but like older students that were doing those practices, that were kind of, what do you call it? They were kind of, um, they were doing those practices, and they were kind of like not, um they weren't too aware. How do I word what I'm trying to say? They were doing those practices, and maybe they didn't know where it was coming from, but this priest kind of mentioned that he thought some of those practices they were doing, like lashing each other and like doing all kinds of rituals that were like painful and stuff, but kind of like almost sexual with like nudity and stuff. Like it was kind of a sexual exploration mixed with some kind of like religious, like purification ritual that these kids had kind of made up on their own because of the repression. I mean, I have not looked into this stuff, and this wasn't a documentary, it was a movie, but there were just some concepts that came up that I wondered. I was like, I wonder. Like, and I'm not saying if people have like BDSM fetishes or whatever, like it's because of some sexual repressive thing. I don't really know. I don't really know. I know there is research behind fetishes and things. I'm not like a fetish shaming person. Everybody likes what they like. If you're not abusing people or doing non-consensual things, if you're doing consensual things with adults, with consenting adults, and you're being respectful towards one another, whatever that looks like, I'm not here to really judge any of that. I just think if anything borders or becomes abuse or manipulation or some non-consensual thing, that's where it's going to be a problem. But I think people's sexual experiences and desires and things kind of look different. I'm not one to say like, oh, people shouldn't do, like, if there are people that are like, oh, like they want to like get naked and lash each other with something and like have some like theme of some scenario of why that's happening. I mean, like, I don't care. Like, why should I care if that's what somebody wants to be doing? You know, good, do that, but I mean, I'm not talking about like again, I'm not talking about consenting adults that are doing this as like a role play or like some kind of sexually expressive thing that they're enjoying. I'm talking about, just in general sexual repression, and that there's something within that realm that kind of can sometimes be related to sexual repression, like people being, and I'm not like coming from like a deep research based background in this. I've read about it before, I've heard about it before, I've never deeply looked into it, and maybe I will, because I think the topic of like fetishes and things is like a very interesting topic. I wouldn't say that I'm like a square vanilla person, but I'm not gonna like talk about that on here in like detail. But I could kind of see where certain things could be, could stem from certain interests and things. But because I know certain things that I've been interested in, that I've had an interest in since I was, I don't know how old, not old. I wasn't old. I wasn't like actively having sex with people, but I was definitely like a kid, and had interest in certain things that I kind of noticed. I was like, okay, why am I like attracted to this like scenario? You know, I think a lot of people have that. Some people don't. A lot of people do, and it's like whatever, you know. But I think sometimes it comes from somewhere, but I don't think there's any shame in it necessarily. Like if it's something that carries over through development, brain development, I don't know. I don't know exactly why. I have my own speculations and theories behind it, but I don't have any scientific base to really be like saying this is definitively the only thing. I could kind of see where I could piece certain things together and be like, oh, like this seems relevant in this way. I hope I'm making sense. But basically, I'm not trying to be shaming. I'm just saying things come from certain places, and so when it comes to like though there's this, I'm trying to formulate what I'm trying to say. There's this so I watch something once? I kind of watched something once where it wasn't, I don't know if this was the main topic, but a topic that came up was something around like people having fetishes and kind of like the safety behind certain things. Like maybe if a person can't just isn't just attracted to like, missionary vanilla stuff, you know, and they have other interests, sometimes it can come from like maybe something that happened, maybe not. It doesn't necessarily mean there was like some big bad situation. It could just be like, you know, say like a role play or something can be like a safe space for certain people. Like there is research behind that for some people different types of role plays can, like if it's a safe environment with the safe person or people, you know, they can partake in those activities, and if there's consent and rules and people kind of have a discussion about what's going on, people can kind of have this experience where they can kind of role play into certain scenarios, and that can be like a sexual safety for some people. Like some people can't some people don't really get turned on without like a scenario or some kind of role play or something. That is something that exists. And then there are people that, you know, aren't really into anything that's not just like a vanilla kind of situation. You know, some people aren't into certain things. Like it's fine, but it's just, I guess, where it becomes complicated is like, okay, well, the person or people that you're with, do they understand that, and are they open to you being the way you are, and can they do that too? Like the example that I was saying, like if somebody's like lashing somebody else, not everybody wants to be the lasher, not everybody wants to be the lashee, you know? So there would still need to be some kind of like you can't force somebody to do it, or like get mad at them if they don't want to do it or whatever. Like that's not okay. And then, you know, so there'd still have to be that, what do you call it? Like a compromise isn't the right word. Like that, you'd have to like complement, like a complementary or supplementary, I don't know, you'd have to kind of like have like, I don't know. They'd kind of have to be on the same wavelength of like both people are like okay with it. Both parties, all parties are okay with it. But yeah, they were mentioning in that so those were the themes that I think the kid that was the bedwetter, the priest who made I think they were called Jesuit brothers. The Jesuit brother who made who kind of brought up the realization of how unnatural it is, of how people are like super going like too extreme with you know, it was kind of like an anti-sexuality zone at that school. So it was like they had to shower with their shorts, with their bathing suits on, and they had shower doors, right? So they had shower doors. They had to shower with their bathing suits on, weren't allowed to take them off. One kid was taking off his bathing suit behind a door, a closed door, and one of the Jesuit brothers kind of opened the door on him and saw that he was nude and was like scolding him for it and like trying to shame him and be like, oh, like you shouldn't do that, like, you know, kind of thing. And it's like he was just taking a shower, you know. But also just the guy like opened the door on him is like, that's not appropriate either. And so it's kind of like, I'm not gonna talk about all the weird stuff that happened in that movie. Like, if you want to watch it, I don't even know if I should even say trigger warning. I mean trigger warning, and just because everything these days is a trigger warning. There are scenes in there that probably a lot of people wouldn't really want to see, and I wouldn't call it an LGBT movie. There is kind of like one scenario that happens that could be, there might have been one boy that was kind of into guys. But there were some things going on where it was kind of like, you know, they brought up, that one Jesuit brother brought up that kind of idea that like, oh, like sexually they're like, you know, they're going to keep doing like strange things and maybe even unsafe things like some of them were doing, because they were going to these extremes to try to get these spiritual like awakenings. But I don't know if that's like common, you know, that people combine like religious, like, oh, I'm trying to get to this religious state of ecstasy, but through some kind of sexual thing. That to me sounds like, it sounds, because I think one of these guys was learning about these types of techniques that other people had done. It wasn't all sexual stuff, but it was like, I don't know. It was not stuff that I would assume would make somebody feel pleasant. It was like different forms of things. I'm not even going to go into detail because I feel like anything gets anybody canceled these days. But if you want to watch the movie, watch the movie. The details are in the movie. I'm trying not to. I'm not trying to spoil it, and I'm also trying to not give a lot of the details for people who maybe don't want to hear all those details, and I kind of don't want to talk about them, because I know it is kind of like topics that it's maybe controversial, I would say. Um, but yeah, so those people, in that movie, that's one example of kind of like a sexual repressive like movie that shows sexual repression and kind of like the extremes that kind of people might go to because of that kind of thing. Now, I'm not saying people can't be celibate or that they can't just like avoid having sex or that they can't be asexual without like losing their minds and just starting to like act all strange and stuff, but I would say for the people who, you know, have desires to partake in those things, if they completely just cut that off and don't ever do anything with that or entertain it or whatever, I think it's something that, somebody's mind isn't going to just let it go. Like, they're probably going to start having dreams or other things happening, but I don't really think, I don't know if it just goes away. Maybe for people it just goes away. Like, I don't really know how that works, um but yeah, there were some scenes where the guy, one of the Jesuit brothers, like at the pool, he would kind of get this angle where he could look into the women's locker room, and people were changing or toweling off in there, or like changing in and out of bathing suits and stuff. So there, you could kind of like, the doors were kind of short, so if he would duck down under in the pool at a certain angle and kind of look up, he could kind of see under some of the doors a little bit. And he went to the pool and spent time kind of looking under the doors a little bit, and then he realized what he had done, and he was like super ashamed of himself and ended up like, having like a crying spell, and because he felt bad about what he was doing. And there was an old man that there was one time where they were like playing chess or something. Like, these guys were like sitting around, maybe drinking whiskey, scotch, something like that. And they're sitting around as these old Jesuit brothers, and the older guy, I think there was the oldest man in the room, he was kind of just like super open-minded. But there was a priest who gave a sermon that he seemed like nice to the kids, but when he gave that sermon, I was like, dude, if I was that age and heard something like that, I would be horrified that like anything, I don't know if people who were raised in religion, I think, get this. But if you've ever heard a sermon where it affects you to a point where you're like, I can't do this because I feel like I'm gonna go to hell or something along those lines, like it that sermon instilled the fear of hell in some of these kids, especially the main character. And some of that sermon was talking about sexuality and like masturbation and things like that. And I've heard a lot of people talk about like trying to like educate youth or teens or whatever age range of people, saying don't masturbate because of whatever reasons. And goodness, it's crazy sometimes, some of the things that people think. If you've ever seen the movie Kinsey, that's another one where it was kind of like a more repressive society, and just him coming out with the scale and all that kind of stuff. But I think there was a scene in there where he was talking to his dad or something, and his dad kind of mentioned that he had like he was raised with like some kind of chastity belt that his dad kept the key of, and that he wasn't allowed, he never masturbated or did anything sexual till he was like married. I guess they took it off of him or something. But I mean, that kind of stuff is like, I can't even imagine like things like that. I'm like, I can't even imagine that like medically people would recommend this to people back in the day. This was like a medical recommendation. And I don't even know. I don't think it's okay. To me, it just seems like not okay to do to somebody. But I mean, what are you gonna do? You know. But it's kind of one of those things. And the dad kind of mentioned like being teased for it, and so like it seems like it was something that was noticeable. Like, I don't know, but it's like people would know probably because I don't know. I don't really know. I don't want to go into it because I don't really know. But I mean, I'm just thinking that would not be a good experience. And then like there are a lot of things like that that are just kind of like weird, like sexual repression related kind of stories, and it's kind of just like strange. It's a strange topic. I'm trying to think if there are other, I need to start driving. I'm trying to think if there are other scenarios. Let me see. I think those were the ones. The Kinsey one didn't even come to my mind. Mostly the movie. Oh, I was going to talk about the Amish. And I don't want people to think I'm picking on the Amish, because I'm not picking on the Amish. Just, they have a lot of good topics that get brought up about their religious upbringings. And that's why I talk about them, is because there's a fascination that I have with groups that, you know, some of that stuff was some of the stuff that maybe I sort of grew up with a touch of that kind of mindset being around me, like adults having those kind of mindsets around me, but it wasn't ever as extreme as like how the Amish experience it. It was never that extreme. So basically, the ones that do have Rumspringa, I think that's the only time that they could technically explore sexually. Because basically they're not like forced to follow the rules during those times. Like some of them live at home, some of them move out, but not every Amish group has Rumspringa. And so some people who never had Rumspringa, they would probably never get the opportunity to try to go outside the rules, but some do. So that is one interesting take, where it's like there are a lot of Amish that have had a lot of experiences before they got baptized into the church. So they're not like fully unaware, but a lot of them talk about how unaware of things they were when they first got into Rumspringa, or when they became ex-Amish and like had left the church and were like kind of like deciding that they weren't going to get baptized, or maybe they got baptized already and then left after getting baptized. Because once you get baptized, you remember. So if you leave it, for a lot of those communities, if you leave after you've gotten baptized, then it's maybe more of a problem than like if you left, especially if you left while you had Rumspringa. Like if you're still just not back and not baptized, I think you kind of get a little bit more of a pass. But there is kind of like an age range where it's like, okay, you're getting a little older, like, are you going to come back to the community? Like they call like come back, settle down. Like usually they go out during Rumspringa, but they might still go to church. They might still go to church. They might still go out to parties after church. They might still like have a radio or have the internet or something, or might not even live, you know, with their parents, but they might still go to the singing groups on the weekend. I think they do those Sunday nights or something. They might still go and like do that kind of stuff. They play sports and stuff like that. And then like once they get, I think they said 16 and a half or something like that, So they're allowed to, a lot of the communities are allowed to date. I think it's Schwarzenegger that have this kind of, and not all, like, I don't want to, like, say, okay, every single group of Amish that has this name or whatever has this tradition, because that's not true. Different Schwarzenegger churches have different things that they do or don't practice from one another. So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of rules. But yeah, like, they have bundling. Like, I'm just gonna say the terminology in case somebody wants to look it up on their own, and explain a little bit. Like, they basically say, and this happens during a certain age range. I think you have to be 16 and a half and older, where you're allowed to start dating, because you can go to the singing groups, and then you can start asking girls out on dates, and there's like a rule of like 2 weeks in advance kind of thing, and you take her after there's like certain days where the guys would get the buggy and like take the girl out, and like, you know, but you're allowed to practice. Some groups have like where they're allowed to like practice some kind of, like, it's called bundling. There's other terminology like bed courtship, where you're allowed, as like a 16, 17, 18-year-old, whatever age, living with your parents, you can ask a girl as a guy if you can stay over, and you go up in her room, and you guys are allowed to be with your clothes on underneath the covers, like holding each other. I think they said rocking back and forth or something. But it's kind of like, I mean, I don't know what the difference between that and like dry humping is, really. Like, it doesn't sound that different, but they're basically allowed to do that and sit on each other. Well, a girl is allowed to sit on a guy's lap in a rocking chair. Like, there's different practices that they are allowed to do, some of them. Not all of them, but some of them. And there's different ranges. So it's like, even though they are technically a pretty repressive religion, some of the groups, they do allow dating. And if you're dating and you have Rumspringa, you might not have all those same rules, that you might not really be following the rules, or the girls you're dating might not be following the rules of like not having sex before marriage. They might be having sex before marriage, you know? So it's kind of interesting, because I would say I don't know any other Christian type of religions that have like a rule breaking time. Like, they don't want their kids to do it. They don't want they're not like, okay, go on like Johnny and go, and like go on your date and go do some bed courtship bundling with that girl or whatever. Like, they're not like telling them to go do it, but if they do it, it's like they might get punished, but, you know, they're not going to get kicked out of church or shunned necessarily for doing it. If they're in Rumspringa, they're still kind of like, there's something about Rumspringa that makes it like within the rules. It's like more acceptable to do it during Rumspringa versus before Rumspringa or whatever. Like, but that's if you have Rumspringa. Not every group has Rumspringa. So just stuff like that makes it so I guess different. Like, there's no time period in most mainstream Christian religions where you're like, hey, once you're 16 and a half, you can just go out on dates and go start doing all kinds of stuff with people. It's not just sexual stuff, though. They're allowed to like do other stuff too, but that's just because I'm talking about a sexual repression topic. That's one thing. And then I remember one of the guys saying, like, they were so, like, they didn't know where babies came from. They didn't know, like, some of them were raised around farms. Not all Amish are farmers, but the ones this one guy who said because he was raised around farms, they kind of noticed, you know, like, well, animals mount each other and they get pregnant and they, you know, have babies, and they kind of understood like animal husbandry and stuff like that, like somewhat, and like breeding and things like that. So they kind of had some kind of understanding with some of those kinds of things. And not everybody really did. And then I think there's something I heard about with some Mormon groups. Now I'm just saying some because I don't think it's like 100%. Like all of these religions are like, oh yes, everybody do it the exact same way. Like some groups don't believe in any of this stuff and they're like, no, that's wrong. We don't believe in it. We don't promote it. And then there's other groups that are like, oh, go ahead, do whatever you want to do. So yeah, with these some of the Mormon groups, they have like these different things where it's like you can kind of I don't remember what it's called, like docking or something. I don't know. Docking is something else. There's some kind of thing that you can do where it's like, I don't even know, where somebody's jumping on the bed or something, or like moving the bed for you. I don't even understand. But there's ways of like getting around the rules, because on like a technicality, it's like, well, I'm not moving, someone else is moving me, and I just happen to be in this position, you know. So there's some kind of things like that where it's like people kind of break the rules or try to get around the rules, but they're within the limits enough that they can't really get in trouble for those kind of practices. So I don't know what I think about it. It's some weird stuff. It's some real weird stuff. Who's this person pulling in my driveway? All right, good, they're leaving. But yeah, it's really interesting. I hope that was an interesting enough topic. I didn't really have that much to say, but hopefully you liked it. I'm gonna go in and I don't know what I'm gonna do. It's not late, but it's not early, so I'm gonna figure out how I'm gonna spend the rest of my night.